Hey guys, this is Brian from Fantasy Labs. Thanks for watching. Sorry if I sound a little off. I'm battling some sickness, so apologize if I sound a little bit different. But thanks for tuning in. So I'm going to break down the Week 5 Millie Maker winning lineup. And so let's just go through it. So starting off at quarterback is Sam Bradford, who had an okay game. He had two pass touchdowns and two interceptions. So definitely not a perfect game by any means, but enough to get the job done. There's a couple quarterbacks who went for a lot of points. Josh McCown was the highest quarterback on the slate. He scored, like 38, 39 fantasy points, but no one was on him. And I think it's interesting to kind of approach the quarterback position this year. I think it's a little bit different. I think in the past, these quarterbacks have been putting up some high numbers, and especially the elite ones, where you kind of needed to have one of those guys. And there's a big difference between the elite quarterbacks and kind of the mid tier and the lower ones, where Rodgers and Breeze and Luck were winning some of the bigger tournaments. But I think this year, because of how down the quarterback position has been as a whole, because of Luck's injury and Peyton's decline and everything, I think it makes sense to kind of focus on your other areas and kind of just plug in a quarterback. And I think that's true because Sam Bradford, probably wasn't. I know he wasn't in the top 5 quarterbacks, but he was kind of down the list. But at this point, we've seen the last couple of weeks where the quarterback position just doesn't really matter. I mean, you need to get within 22, 25 points. But if you hit on the other big plays, especially at lower ownership, like he did with Martin at 5.4%, the quarterback's almost like your pitcher in baseball. And it's, just find a player who's going to kind of keep you in it and not kill you with a sub 20 point performance. So he found that in Bradford. He was less owned, but it's kind of less important about how owned he was or whatever, and just the fact that he was in that 20 to 25 30 point range and kept him in it. He didn't have to have the top guy. His two running backs were up here. He obviously had 3 running backs, which is interesting that a 3 running back stack. Usually, we've always said that the most optimal lineup in terms of maximizing your upside is to put a wide receiver at your flex position, because it just they have a higher volatility and they can go off for more points. But we actually saw no receivers above 30 points. Odell Beckham was the top receiver, and he didn't get to 30 points. And we had obviously all 3 of his running backs get to 30 points. So this is a good contrarian strategy of going running back in the flex position. Forsett, I think, was an obvious play with Crockett Gilmore out and Steve Smith out as well. Forsett was kind of be the focus of that offense, and I think that was a good play. He was one of my main cash guys, and I think even at his high ownership, he was just such in a good spot where it kind of didn't matter, even though he was at 20%, as you see, that he was just in a great spot because Baltimore really didn't have anyone else. That he was just going to get a ton of touches, and as you can see, he did both in the run and the pass game. Devonta Freeman is a guy who I officially will admit that I'm wrong on. I wrote about him today in my hindsight versus fluke article. I wrote a lot about how I've been fading him, and I gave reasons why I faded him, but why I'm officially wrong, and why this particular game showed me that I was wrong on him. So I would encourage you to go read that, because I wrote a lot of words on that I don't need to get into right now to keep this video short, but go read that. But obviously Devonta Freeman was a great play. He was high owned. He was a little bit less owned than I thought. He was over 40% in the Thursday FanDuel lineups, but a little depressed here, maybe because of that reason, or I'm not sure. But obviously a good play. Edelman's a guy that's interesting, especially in a tournament lineup like this. Usually he's kind of a cash game option, just because he has such a safe floor. Like, he's going to get a bunch of receptions, a bunch of look from Brady. Whereas Gronk is kind of the higher upside guy in that offense, where he may not get as many receptions, but he's going to be the heavy focus of Brady once they get into the red zone. But it actually turned out to be a little bit of the opposite, where Edelman didn't get as many receptions, but got a ton of receiving yards in the receiving touchdown. And I think a lot of people were on him because of the safety. So I didn't think he was an amazing GPP play just because of his ownership. But obviously, it's another one of those things where we just kind of kept him in it and let the other great contrarian picks win it for him. Allen Robinson was a guy that I loved. I think that Bortles and Robinson and Hearns are actually kind of a sneaky, really good pass offense this year, and we haven't really caught up as far as the public goes on, the fact that they've been so good. Bortles has been one of the top quarterbacks. I think he's a top 5 or 6 fantasy quarterback this season, which is surprising. It's tricky because I'm not sure exactly how good Bortles is in like real life football and how good he's going to be. But they're much improved from last year, and he obviously has a connection with Robinson and Hearns. So, the fact that they've been kind of underpriced, and I think will continue to be underpriced. I looked at the salaries, and Robinson and Hearns were both underpriced this upcoming week. So I think that they're both viable candidates for I think Robinson's more of a cash game and tournament play, but Hearns is obviously a guy with a high upside that you could use in a tournament. So I think that they're going to be viable for a while until that they raise the salaries of Bortles and these two guys. So great play on that one. Sanders was a guy I loved. He was one of my favorite receivers in the weekend because I actually talked to Tank and some other people, especially Tank in that Wednesday podcast. And Oakland was really susceptible to kind of middle of the field defense. They're okay on the outside with their cornerbacks, but they're right in the middle of the field. They've been susceptible. So the whole mantra that everyone had talked about was use a tight end against Oakland. And actually that happened because a lot of people used Owen Daniels, and he was kind of a really popular play and ended up not doing anything at all. But talking to some football people like Tank, we thought that Emmanuel Sanders would actually be the guy who would get into the middle of the field and be that slot receiver that really took advantage of that position as opposed to Owen Daniels. So it's not always just like position versus defense. It's really like who's that guy who's going to be in the spot where the defense isn't as good, in the weak spot, you could say. So I think that's important to kind of realize that that's where like the data in the film can come together, whereas the data says to go with a tight end, whereas the film, if you kind of go that route in your studies, you can see that even though that it says to go with a tight end, Denver actually uses Sanders in that regard. So Sanders was actually the play as opposed to Owen Daniels, and that definitely worked out in at lower ownership to under 7%. So that was a great play. I loved him. Antonio Gates was an interesting guy. I actually really liked him as a play. Usually with a guy who's coming back, you might want to wait a week or so and see whether he's going to have the same rapport with his quarterback or how he's going to fit into the offense, especially with Keenan Allen having such a good start of the year, where Keenan Allen was kind of that go-to number one guy for Phillip Rivers. I think a lot of people might have been scared off because they weren't sure exactly how he was going to fit in and whether Ladarius Green was still going to play or whether Rivers would still target Keenan Allen. But I think kind of the sharps were still on Antonio Gates because they know that him and Rivers have such a good rapport, and that probably wasn't going to go away even amidst of the 4-game suspension. So obviously that paid off. He had those two touchdowns and a bunch of receptions, and it looks like he's still Rivers' guy, even though Keenan Allen and some of the other guys have had some good years. Antonio Gates, as long as he's in San Diego, I think is going to be the guy that Rivers really targets. So great play. You get him at he was a little bit higher owned than I would expect, but still nothing that, is going to kill you. So great play at tight end. And Doug Martin obviously was the best play of this lineup, the one that probably won him the million. And is Doug Martin, who kind of just came out of nowhere. I don't think this is a particularly great play. I wrote about this in the Hindsight versus Fluke article, where I just try to figure out whether, in hindsight, we should have realized it was a better play and we just missed it, or whether it was kind of a fluky play. and I'm kind of putting this in the fluke category. The Tampa Bay offense hasn't really been good this year, and if anything, it's been more pass heavy with Evans and especially Vincent Jackson. So I thought that this would be a low scoring. It was actually the lowest scoring game, or the second lowest scoring game in terms of Vegas over under on the slate at like 41, I believe. So that plus they were just narrow underdogs. So if you count the fact that the line wasn't in their favor as far as the over under, plus the game script wasn't really in their favor, I guess it was slightly, but not enough to really to make you believe that Doug Martin was going to, they're going to be up and he was going to be a big part of that. And also, just the fact that I think Jacksonville has been kind of the brunt of some jokes lately in the last couple of years, just because they've been one of the worst teams in football. But they've actually been pretty good this year. And coming into this game, they're actually the fourth best run defense in the NFL. So I think when you combine all those factors, people weren't very on Doug Martin. I think that was probably smart. So you could say it was a great contrarian play because people weren't on him, but I think maybe this one was a bit lucky, a bit fluky. It's nothing to take away from the lineup or anything like that, and obviously it's $1 million, so I'm sure they don't care. But this was an interesting play to me where I didn't see this one coming at all. So, but doesn't matter. Good on them for using Doug Martin and winning. And then lastly, the Packers at 6.3% owned. I think they were a good upside play. They don't have the greatest defense in the world, but they are good at getting some turnovers and pressuring the quarterback. And Nick Foles has really been susceptible to that. So I think that was a good play. Definitely, there are some safer plays in cash games, but if you're looking for upside of guys who are a defense that can get some turnovers and return them for a touchdown. As you can see, they sacked him 3 times, got 4 interceptions and a defensive touchdown. It's just huge, plus a block. So they definitely had a lot of upside as a defense, and that paid off. So that's my breakdown. It's again interesting because of the 3 running backs, and we've seen a lot of Millie Maker lineups so far in the last 5 weeks that have won despite kind of going against heuristics that we know of as far as how to maximize the upside of your lineup. And I think that's going to be something that we look back at the end of the season or maybe is going on and really try to reevaluate maybe some of these heuristics and whether they apply in such large tournaments like this, and whether negative correlations are really that important, be it negative or positive, and whether we need to kind of rethink that strategy. It's something that I'm going to look into, and something that I know is going to be at the mindset of a lot of players. So something to keep in mind, but great lineup, 255, definitely up from last week. So great job on this lineup, and that's my breakdown. So thanks for watching again, and we'll talk to you guys next week.